You've been trying to force your brain to work on everyone else's schedule. Waking up when society says you should be productive, attempting focus during hours when your nervous system is actively fighting you, wondering why you can't just function like normal people, when really the problem isn't that you're broken. It's that you've been operating your brain at the wrong times, trying to run software that requires specific conditions during hours when those conditions don't exist in your neurochemistry. And nobody told you that ADHD brains have windows, specific periods when dopamine flows slightly better, when executive function decides to show up uninvited, when focus becomes possible without feeling like you're pushing a boulder uphill. And if you miss those windows, if you waste them on low-priority tasks or sleep through them completely, you're left trying to accomplish things during hours when your brain has essentially logged off. When no amount of willpower or caffeine or self-hatred will make you functional because the neurochemical environment required for productivity simply isn't available, and you've been blaming yourself for this, calling it laziness, calling it lack of discipline, when really you've just been trying to work against your brain's natural rhythm instead of learning to ride it. You start tasks in the morning because that's when productive people work. Except your brain doesn't wake up until noon, and by then you've already wasted your willpower trying to be functional during hours when your dopamine is still sleeping. You push through afternoon exhaustion because quitting feels like failure. You stay up late feeling guilty about everything you didn't accomplish during the normal work hours when everyone else seemed fine. And you're running on a schedule designed for neurotypical brains while operating a neurodivergent system, trying to make a sports car run on the wrong fuel and wondering why the engine keeps stalling. You set alarms that you snooze 17 times, make morning routines you never follow, promise yourself that tomorrow you'll be different, tomorrow you'll wake up early and be productive and finally function like an adult, and then tomorrow comes and you're exhausted before you even start, already behind before the day begins, already failing at the basic task of being awake and alert during socially acceptable hours. You feel broken because everyone says mornings are for productivity, but your brain doesn't turn on until 2 p.m. Feel guilty because you're most creative at 11 p.m. when you're supposed to be winding down. Feel like a failure because the times when you're actually capable don't match the times when the world expects you to perform. And you've been trying to fix your rhythm instead of working with it. Trying to become someone whose brain works on command instead of someone who's learned when their brain actually cooperates and structures their entire life around those precious windows of actual functionality. You're not lazy when you can't focus at 9 a.m. You're just trying to force execution during hours when your brain literally doesn't have the neurochemical ingredients required for sustained attention, for task initiation, for the executive function that makes just doing it possible for people whose brains produce dopamine on a predictable schedule instead of whenever they feel like it. Here's what's actually happening in your ADHD brain, and why timing is everything, even though nobody mentions this in all those articles about productivity and routine and morning habits, written by people whose brains have never experienced the specific hell of knowing exactly what you need to do and being completely unable to start doing it. Your dopamine production, the neurotransmitter that's already in short supply with ADHD, fluctuates throughout the day in patterns that are different from neurotypical brains, and these fluctuations create windows, periods where your brain is slightly more capable of focus, of task initiation, of sustained effort, and periods where attempting any of that is like trying to run a marathon in quicksand, technically possible but so difficult that the effort required exceeds what most humans can sustain. And the tragedy is that most people with ADHD never identify their windows, never learn when their brain is actually available for work, never discover that they've been scheduling important tasks during their brain's offline hours, and then wondering why everything is so much harder than it should be. For most ADHD brains, and this is going to destroy everything you've been told about productivity and morning routines and the importance of starting your day early. The real windows of functionality often come late morning to early afternoon, or late at night, the exact times when society tells you should be doing other things. When morning people are already exhausted from their productive hours, and night owls are just starting to feel human. And if you're someone whose brain doesn't fully boot up until 11 a.m., you're not broken, you're not lazy, you're just operating on a delayed circadian rhythm that's actually common with ADHD, but nobody talks about because it doesn't fit the narrative of discipline and willpower that people love to push. And if you're someone who suddenly gets incredibly focused at 10 p.m., who finally feels capable after everyone else has shut down, that's not insomnia or poor sleep hygiene. That's your brain finally producing enough dopamine to make executive function possible, and fighting it trying to force yourself to sleep because that's what you're supposed to do. That's wasting one of the few times your brain actually wants to work. And here's the brutal truth that's going to either save your life or make you angry about all the years you wasted trying to be a morning person. You need to stop organizing your life around when society says you should be productive and start organizing it around when your brain is actually capable of being productive. which means you might need to do your most important work at midnight, might need to protect late morning from meetings and calls, might need to completely restructure your schedule around the 2 or 3 hours per day when your brain actually cooperates instead of the 8 hours when you're supposed to be working, but mostly just suffering through tasks that feel impossible because your neurochemistry won't support them. This means disappointing people who expect you to be available at normal hours, means explaining to bosses and family and friends that your brain works different and you need to honor that instead of constantly trying to fix it, means accepting that you might always be someone who's useless in the morning and brilliant at night, or vice versa, and that's not a flaw that needs correcting, it's a feature that needs accommodating. Most ADHD brains have two main types of windows. There's the morning window that can happen anywhere from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. depending on your circadian rhythm, where you might get 2 to 4 hours of actual capability if you catch it, if you don't waste it on emails and meetings and low-priority garbage, if you protect it like the precious resource it is, and use it for work that actually requires focus and executive function. And then there's the night window that shows up anywhere from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. when suddenly your brain remembers how to function and you could work for hours if society didn't insist you should be sleeping. If you didn't feel guilty about being productive at wrong times, if you hadn't spent your whole life trying to force yourself into a schedule that actively works against your neurology. So here's what you do right now. Here's the experiment that might change everything. For 1 week, just 1 week, track when you naturally feel most capable, when tasks that usually feel impossible suddenly feel manageable, when you start something and actually finish it without it taking 5 times longer than it should, when focus comes easier, when your brain feels like it's actually working with you instead of against you. And those times, whenever they are, whether they're socially acceptable or not, whether they fit into a normal schedule or not, those are your windows. Those are the hours you need to protect with your life. Those are when you schedule the work that matters, the tasks that require actual cognition, the projects you've been failing to finish because you keep trying to work on them during hours when your brain is actively unavailable for that level of function. And then here's the harder part, you restructure everything else around protecting those windows, which means saying no to morning meetings. If your window is 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. means staying up late. If your window is 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. means disappointing people who want you available during their preferred hours. Means accepting that your productivity won't look like everyone else's, and that's fine because everyone else doesn't have your brain, doesn't operate on your neurochemistry, doesn't need to work around dopamine deficits and executive dysfunction and all the other features of ADHD that make standard schedules basically impossible to maintain without constant suffering. Stop trying to become a morning person if your brain doesn't work in the morning. Stop forcing yourself to sleep at 10 p.m. if your brain comes alive at 11. Stop organizing your day around when you're supposed to be productive according to productivity influencers whose brains produce dopamine on demand. And start organizing it around when you're actually productive according to your specific neurochemistry, your specific windows, your specific version of ADHD that might be completely different from everyone else's but is the only version you have to work with, the only brain you're going to get. And making it work means accepting its terms instead of constantly trying to renegotiate them, means working with your circadian rhythm instead of against it, means building a life around your windows instead of trying to force your windows to fit into someone else's life template. You've been trying to make your brain work on everyone else's schedule and calling yourself a failure when it doesn't. But here's what you're learning now. What you're finally ready to accept, even though it means disappointing people and breaking rules and admitting that you can't function the way normal people function. Your brain has its own schedule, its own rhythm, its own windows of capability, and respecting that, organizing your life around that, protecting those windows like they're the most valuable hours of your day because they are. That's not giving up. That's not making excuses. That's finally understanding that working with your ADHD instead of against it is the only way you're going to survive it. The only way productivity stops feeling like torture. The only way you finally finish things instead of just starting them. And if that means being a night person in a morning world, or a late morning person in an early bird world, or any other configuration that doesn't fit the standard template, then that's what it means. And you're done apologizing for a brain that was never going to work on anyone's schedule but its own.